And in this hour of the Zero Hour, we are going to focus on the Los Angeles teachers' strike because it's an important story, it's an exciting story, and it's one that I think we all should know a lot more about. Sarah Jaffe, who's been on the program before, a great writer on politics, on labor, author and activism, author of Necessary Trouble, Americans in Revolt for Nation Books, and a fellow at the Type Media Center, wrote an excellent piece about that strike in the nation. And she joins us now to talk about it. So first of all, Sarah, thanks for coming back on the program.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Secondly, let's talk about, the strike it's the eruption, the positive eruption in most cases, but of forces of various kinds that have been building over time. It's like a volcano in that sense. And so it's always interesting to look underneath the volcano to see what might have led up to it. And your piece talked about a shift in the teachers' union that you felt was critical to. So first of all, I guess I would start out by saying I think we agree the strike was successful. And a milestone in some ways, really a great step forward. But you were saying in your article that a shift in leadership may have had a lot to do with that, right?
Yeah, well, there's been a movement underfoot, sort of bubbling up in various places among teacher unionists for a while now. The sort of first time that most of the public got to see it was in 2012 when the Chicago teachers struck. But this kind of reform that the Chicago teachers did, that the Los Angeles teachers did, has been happening in a lot of places. And so what's been happening is that teachers are really rethinking what a union for educators can be. So they're thinking about things like, not just wages and benefits, but really, what do we need to make public schools the best thing they can be? What do we need to really stand up for the idea of the public good, the common good? And how do we take that, therefore, to the bargaining table and then into the streets if necessary? So what happened in Los Angeles was a reform caucus that had been building again for, about a decade, really started to take shape around the 2008 financial crisis, when a lot of layoffs happened, when budget cuts in the schools were getting really vicious, and built to a place where they could take power in the union. And then once in power in the union, really reshape what the union was about. So they did things like bring in a political department, an organizing department, a parent community relations department, and a research department, things that the union had actually never had, and actually got the teachers to vote to raise their own union dues in order to pay for all of these things, so they could actually build a union that could do what they ended up doing, I guess it's a couple of weeks ago now.
So, what you're really describing in terms of this shift of union thinking in Los Angeles and elsewhere, first of all, I think we would agree that there's nothing wrong with fighting for better wages and benefits.
Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. And they did get a 6% raise in this contract. It's not like it wasn't part of the issue.
No, but what I take away from all of this is that there is a deepening understanding, and I don't know to what extent it's because the world is changing or to what extent understanding is changing, but there is a deepening understanding that labor movements, unions, like other aspects of human endeavor, exist in a kind of matrix of forces that are economic and cultural and community and social and so on, and that if we are going, and that the struggle for teachers' wages, benefits, working conditions, ability to achieve their human potential as teachers, ability to do their jobs fully as teachers, ability to bring out the human potential of their students, that all this dimensionality of what it means to be a teacher today, or what it means to be a collective group of teachers, that there's an understanding that there is a broader struggle or a series of struggles involved because of this matrix of forces. I don't know if I'm being very eloquent in saying what I'm trying to say, but perhaps you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think on some level, we would call it class consciousness, right? On another level, we are looking at unions that are really thinking about a variety of intersecting forces that are reasons that it's hard for them to do their jobs and things that they need to tackle in order to be able to do those jobs. So you look at the Los Angeles teachers and the Chicago teachers, and both of these are unions that had a very, very deep focus on racial justice, because they're in rich cities, particularly Los Angeles, but Chicago too. These are cities where you have a lot of people with money. Most of their kids are not in the public schools. Most of the kids in the public schools in Los Angeles are poor. They're Black and brown kids. They're immigrant kids. There's a lot of English language learners. There's a lot of people who are just not being served by the system as it's set up, because it's not set up to take their needs into account. And so to think about what schools the Los Angeles students deserve, in the words of the teachers movement, what they need to think about is English language learners. They need to think about trauma counselors. They need to think about attendance counselors, have somebody who makes sure that the kids are actually coming to school, because if you have parents who are working 2 or 3 jobs in order to just pay the bills, they're not sitting at home, making sure the kid gets off to school with a brown bag lunch in their hand, because they're not there. And so you have to have all of these things in order for the teachers, when they're in the classroom, to be able to just teach. And then the biggest issue in Los Angeles was the size of the classes. I've talked to a teacher who had 49 kids in an AP US History high school class. I had talked to people in elementary schools with 35, 36 kids. And among other things, these school buildings that are 100 years old weren't built to have 45 desks in them. That's just a basic level. And then imagine you're a high school English teacher and you have 45 kids in your English class, and you have to go home and you have to grade 45 papers every time you assign homework. And it's just the amount of work, that gets piled onto people. And then they wonder why the kids are struggling. And it's because they can't get any individual attention when there's 45 people in a classroom.
So you have this sort of doom loop that gets potentially
exactly
right, because you underfund the schools, you don't give the teachers the support they need, and then you get together with your friends at Eli Broad's house or whatever, and lament
the Waltons.
And lament the fact that schools aren't delivering for our kids, and the solution in their minds becomes, well, let's quote unquote disrupt education. So, when I was talking about the broader forces, and you're right, absolutely right, class consciousness is part of it, but class consciousness in the era of mass media, to me, also means understanding the insidious way that upper class consciousness that blames the victims for their own for the 0.01% negligence towards things like public education and other public institutions is a key part of it. This entire dismissal of the public economy, of the public good, of the commons, of the political. What I got from your piece about this in The Nation is that in many ways, the leadership in Los Angeles, the union leadership, got this one right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is important, because you're talking about the Broads and the Waltons of the world, that one of the things that they were fighting in LA was the charter school industry, right? So you have a school board that, in a narrow election that cost something like $14 million, got a majority on the school board and hired this guy who's a Wall Street banker, Austin Butner, to be the superintendent of schools. And he came in with a very clear plan that was to bring in the charters and bring in break up the district and turn it into New Orleans, where there are no public schools. Right. And the teachers fought that very explicitly. They made the charters a big site of the fight. They took a giant march to the headquarters of the California Charter Schools Association. And in the middle of all of this, they also brought 3 charter schools out on strike. So it's kind of funny, because one of the arguments for charter schools is always that they're not union, and the teachers are saying, look, we can organize the charters. If you want us to do that, we'll do that. We can organize the charter schools. But also, the problem with the charters is bigger than just that they don't have unions. The problem with the charters is that they have this idea, like you said, that the people who know best about how to fix the schools are sort of random rich people who, like buzzwords like disruption and innovation. And what they do is they get public resources, right? And one of the things that the teachers won in this contract was some input on charter school co-locations, which is when they literally drop a charter school into your school building.
Well,
and
yes. Yes, and we've covered co-location on this school, and it all, to me, it's part of this new class consciousness. That would be a good title for a book, The New Class
There you
Consciousness.
go.
But it's part of this, that there's a price, the old saying about a price for everything and a value for nothing, that they've somehow...
That was a book.
Yeah, that they've somehow financialized the whole notion of public education and public service in a broader sense, and that somehow, the metaphor I always come up with in my mind is when the emergency manager took over the city of Detroit, and they were going to sell everything that belonged to the city of Detroit, and they put a price, literally, on everything that... And the figure that always stuck in my mind was $55,000 for the giraffe in the zoo. We'll give you 55 grand for the giraffe. It's that mentality, that accountant's mentality, that reductionist mentality was really applied in force in that taking over of the school district. That this really what the teachers were fighting. And I have to ask this question, even though it's slightly parenthetical, but where was Eric Garcetti in all this, the mayor of Los Angeles?
Well, so Eric Garcetti, who is not running for president now, he wants you to know, he popped up in the first couple of days once they finally went out on strike and said, oh, I'll be a mediator. And he got to get his, moment at the podium when they announced their deal, that he got to announce it. But the thing about Los Angeles, it's different than, say, Chicago, is that it does have an elected school board. So Eric Garcetti is not in charge of the schools. He does not have any control over the school board. That's a separately elected, separate body of government. And so, while the teachers certainly wanted him to feel the pressure, and they wanted, the governor, the brand new governor, Gavin Newsom, to feel some pressure, their fight was really with the school board. And that fight continues. There's going to be a special election for a school board seat because somebody had to step down because of a little corruption scandal. So there's going to be a special election for the school board in March. So this fight sort of goes on. But it was interesting to see what can be sort of the downside of an elected school board. I live in New York. People have been challenging mayoral controls at the school here for a while. Chicago, they had a lot of fights over that, and their fight in Chicago was very directly with Rahm Emanuel. But in LA, you have a school board, and school boards are supposed to be sort of locally invested, small-time people who are not really politically ambitious. And then again, like I said, it was this election. There was like $14.7 million in outside spending spent on a school board race. And that's outside as in people who don't live and send their kids to Los Angeles public schools, once again. So when you think about that, and what it looks like, again, to put a price on a school board seat, that is literally putting a price on a school board seat. And the reward for putting a price on that school board seat is you get to get public resources in order to, have your experimental charter school or whatever.
Right. It struck me when that election took place that, I don't know if I'd say it's wrong to have an elected school board, but when we think of elected school boards, we think of a town, right? Like the select men or whatever they're called in Massachusetts. But instead, we have this massive city geographically and in terms of population of Los Angeles. It's certainly wrong to have an elected school board when money drives the political process. So they bought.
It's the sort of problem is the same problem we have in every election, which is that our elections are bought and paid for.
Right.
And so, if you can spend $14.7 million on a school board election, then your school board election is going to be completely corrupt.
Yeah, so
if you don't have any controls on spending in elections and who can spend money in elections, well, we see where that got us. It got us to Trump. It's gotten us, who knows how much the next presidential election is going to cost.
Right, absolutely. So let's just sort of take a look forward. So the teachers really understood, I think, from what you're saying, the parameters of the fight.
Yes.
They
defined the parameters of the fight, which is really, really important. They got out in front. They said, this is what we're fighting for. This is what we see as important. These are our values. These are the people who stand by our side. They organized in the community with parents and students. And by the time it came time to take a strike vote, everybody knew what the fight was about. And they knew it wasn't just about wages.
And they had massive public support. They succeeded. what's the next front? What can we expect in the next several years besides this election that's coming up, which I didn't know about, which is interesting? Yeah. What can we expect to see happen in Los Angeles in the next couple of years, you think?
I think you're going to see this organizing go deeper and go back to sort of different places where they can win different things. Some of these fights are not just contract fights. So the union is part of a coalition that's backing reform of California's notorious Prop 13, which is the property tax ballot measure from the 70s that holds California's property taxes at some just what's the opposite of astronomic? I don't know, microscopically low level.
Correct.
And so they're putting a measure on the ballot for 2020 that will open up taxes on corporate and industrial property, so they can actually tax them at some sort of level to put money back into the schools. So that's a fight that's going to happen in the state legislature. Because of this strike, Gavin Newsom called for some regulation on charter schools, so they're going to be fighting that at the state level, trying to get politicians to push for actual, regulations and caps on charter schools. They just got the school board to vote unanimously to call for a cap on charter schools. So you're going to see political fights on that front happening. And on a sort of closer level, you're going to see, again, the organizing that goes on in the schools continuing, the organizing that's going on in the community continuing, the discussions about what community schools are and look like. What do we do about things like police in the schools? Los Angeles School District has its own police force. What does it look like to experiment and think and move ahead with ideas for what schools should look like that are public schools? This is one of the chants that I heard over and over again was, whose schools are schools? What kind of schools? Public schools. So that kind of fight is going to go on. And the other thing that's happening is that other teachers' unions are voting to strike. Denver voted to strike. That is potentially forthcoming. Oakland is literally in the middle of a strike vote as we speak. The West Virginia teachers are about to have more walkouts. At least one county has already voted to have a walkout because the legislature is putting forward a bunch of attacks on public schools, including trying to bring in charters, which they've never had in West Virginia before. Oklahoma, same thing is happening. And you're going to look at other places that haven't had this kind of movement among the teachers, who are going to continue to look at these victories and say, like, oh, when we fight, we win.
And I love the fact that it's teachers doing this for many reasons, including the fact that they're a community focal point. They're a social focal point. They're kind of a fulcrum in families and in communities and in life. So Sarah Jaffe, author of Necessary Trouble, thanks for great coverage of this, and thanks so much for coming back on the program.
Thank you.